I've always been a very hands-on person, and I like the beauty of a machine that is well put together. I'm excited to work here because we are building a state-of-the-art particle accelerator in order to make medical radioisotopes more available for cancer treatments. I want to build something that matters, and this is something that matters. Being a member of IEEE, there's a whole community of people who are interested in what you're interested in. IEEE USA is my competitive edge.
Hello, welcome to IEEE USA's IEEE Day 2024 premier presentation, the dialogue with Nobel Laureate Dr. Robert Woodrow Wilson. I'm Bala Prasanna, IEEE Northeast Region Director. As a young kid growing up in India, I had a fascination for Nobel Prize winners. I always considered them a breed apart, known for their scientific discoveries, literary accomplishments, economic theories, or their work in producing durable world peace. This fascination has continued to this day. Adding to that, I have always wanted to know how they reached their peak performance, what challenges, motivations, and frustrations they encounter, what messages they have for the younger generation, how they perceive humanity, and what they want their legacy to be. So many questions. Of course, you can't just get a Nobel laureate to sit down and answer such questions on a whim. For many reasons, you may not be on the same wavelength. They may not have the time or inclination, especially if you're not a person with some status or notoriety in that field, or you're not from a major newspaper or TV network. However, I'm reminded of the efforts of my college professor, whom we called GTN, GT Narayan Rao, who persisted and successfully researched and interviewed two great Nobel laureates of Indian origin, Dr. C.V. Raman and Dr. S. Chandrasekhar, to publish two all-time classics. GTN's words that humanity needs your message, posterity will cherish it, and we of your times are privileged to have it, ring so true and have been a source of inspiration for me here. Dr. Robert Wilson, a Homedale, New Jersey resident, Bell Labs alumnus, and Nobel Prize winner in 1978, along with Dr. Arno Penzias, for his groundbreaking work on the detection of cosmic microwave background. At age 87, has been very generous with his time and open to answering anything we want to ask him. Dr. Wilson's simplicity, clarity and thoroughness in his responses are truly remarkable. His thoughtful, original answers reflect his deep empathy and concern for others. He is optimistic about the future, both in terms of the evolving ecosystem of abundant information and the young people who will be the stewards of that future. My friend and fellow IEEE volunteer, Dr. Catherine August Hitt, has developed a rapport with Dr. Wilson over the years. Hitt sat down with Dr. Wilson to ask him questions and elicit answers that came straight from his heart and mind. Before switching to Hitt's dialogue with Dr. Wilson, hey Kit, I want to ask you, what has your experience been working with Dr. Wilson for this interview? How did you prepare, knowing his likes and preferences? What does Dr. Wilson want others to know? What is his message to young and aspiring scientists and engineers?
Thank you so much, Bala Prasanna, for welcoming me into this room. And thank you very much for engaging with this informal conversation with the soft-spoken Dr. Wilson. He's a luminary, a role model, and a leader. In addition, we had a chance to work together over the years. I had joined Bell Labs in 1991, and when I first met Dr. Wilson, I was concerned, would I measure up? How would I interact with people who had such tremendous achievements? And Dr. Wilson's advice to me was to bring my best to the room. And that's something that he shares with everyone. Bring your best to the room. He encourages and engages people of all ages and all backgrounds. He's a resource to all, encouraging collaboration with others, encouraging ideas from people of all ages. He believes in lifelong learning. We'll see a lot of his experiences in the upcoming video.
Thank you, Kit. That's very interesting. I'm looking forward to the rest of the video. I must say at this point that I have met Dr. Wilson on several occasions. It has been truly a moment of joy and awe to behold being in the presence of such greatness. Dr. Wilson was recently honored with eminent member recognition by the IEEE Honor Society Eta Kappa Nu. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, and thank you, Kit, on behalf of IEEE for making this dialogue possible. Over to you, Kit.
This chat with Dr. Robert Woodrow Wilson provides a discussion in an informal context with a soft-spoken luminary, a role model, and a leader, Nobel Laureate and Eta Kappa Nu eminent member. As a role model, Dr. Wilson leads by example. He engages with people of all ages and backgrounds. He is a resource to all, encouraging collaboration, lifelong learning, sharing with others, and encouraging ideas from people of all ages. Dr. Wilson follows in the traditions of those luminaries of history, including those who were at Bell Labs when he first made the decision to join. He also shares with us how important the traditions of daily meetings is to advancing technology for humanity. In addition, many of those at his workplace found great resources from IEEE, for example, journals, meetings, and conferences that kept people current and inspired innovation. He describes the encouragement and support he received and became part of over the years. Dr. Wilson continues to be a very active resource in our community. He continues to work in his field, encourage others, meeting with students, teachers, mentors, peers, and being inspired each day. Excellent. Okay, so we were just talking a little bit about the response or the interaction between you and your family when you found out that you won the Nobel Prize, and it was, and you had a really great experience with your dad. He was visiting at the time. Can you help us understand?
No, that was years earlier.
Okay.
That was when the New York Times broke the news that we had made the discovery.
Okay.
And it just happened that he was visiting us. He lived in Houston. We were in New Jersey, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't actually subscribers to the Times, but while we were making breakfast the next morning, he went down to the pharmacy in Homedale Village and bought a New York Times, brought it back, and there on the front page of the Times was a picture of our antenna and the start of an article about our discovery. A great time for father and son.
It's really great. And you were saying that you hadn't kept your dad up to date.
I hadn't. Yeah, I don't think he knew this was coming.
Did anyone know that it was coming? Did you think that other friends and family were aware?
Actually, my initial attitude was that, well, this explanation is a possibility, but there may be some other explanation.
I see.
And Walter Sullivan with the New York Times sort of pushed me over into thinking, well, I better learn some cosmology. This seems to be the real explanation. The world's taking it seriously.
That's really nice. It must have been an interesting conversation with the New York Times, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so from that point on, did more of your friends and family begin to notice what you were doing since you made the front page of the paper?
I didn't notice it if they did, but they may have.
I see. Okay. So at that time, when you were working at Bell Labs, did you enjoy the collegiate attitude and opportunities of working with people who were interested in not only advancing technology for industry, but also advancing research and opportunities to continue the discussions that you had with astronomy and so forth?
Well, I think one of the marvelous things about Bell Labs is that people were encouraged to contribute across department lines. In the university, there's sort of a group in a department and they work together, but they pretty much rewarded for things they do in their group. Whereas at Bell Labs, if you contribute to someone way over somewhere else, that could be part of your annual review and you would be rewarded for it.
That's
So
very
people were very willing to share their expertise. And Bell Labs was full of people who had written the book.
Yeah. What's really cool about hearing this is I'm reminded of how different things are at different companies. And when people are out there in the real world, living their life, sometimes they're faced with those decisions about working with others, collaborating and sharing. And were you always privileged with that opportunity from the very earliest days? Or were there times when you knew that you had to sort of look at your own paper and concentrate on one particular thing?
Well, certainly I had parts of projects that I did myself, but I think always it was in some sort of collaboration, one way or another. One of the other marvelous things about Bell Labs was the idea of when something comes up, you get to the bottom of it. You don't just brush it off if doesn't seem to be too important. Of course, if it's really unimportant, that it doesn't count. But we were allowed to spend, I don't know, a year and a half or something investigating this funny noise that we had found without people saying, well, why don't you get busy and do something useful?
Right. So were you able to explore some of the work of people who had preceded you at Bell Labs and look to them for some guidance?
Well, yes. Art Crawford had built the 20-foot horn reflector, understood antenna theory. He and Dave Hogg had made measurements of horn reflectors. There was all this background information about what it should be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
If we hadn't known what a precise measuring instrument it was, we probably wouldn't have paid any attention to the excess noise. or nor would we have tried to make the measurement we were making. But we we knew from the background work which had been done that we ought to be able to measure some property of the sky independent of the earth around us.
And this is right on the
that-
tails of Jansky as well, correct?
Mhm. Yes, I think Jansky may have been behind some of this, that Art Crawford and Carl Jansky had come to Bell Labs at the same time. They had even roomed together for a while. And Jansky made the discovery that there was radio radiation coming from the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which was sort of the invention, if that's the right word, of radio astronomy. And this was in the Depression, and there was people were working short hours, and there was a feeling that they had to really concentrate on Bell system things. So I think there was a feeling among the group that Jansky's discovery was not really properly followed up. So when they had built this marvelous receiving system for the ECHO project, and they knew that it could do things in astronomy that had not been done, they went out and hired Arno and me to do it and gave us support to do it.
And you had worked with some of those people before you came to Bell Labs, or you had interacted with them, and so you had a good idea who you were going to be able to work with and what sort of opportunity you had there, correct?
Well, we had worked a little bit with people at Murray Hill who had invented and perfected the traveling wave maser amplifiers. When I was a graduate student, they offered Caltech a traveling wave maser, and I worked some with that. I didn't actually get to go to Bell Labs and do it because I had to finish up my thesis. But Radhakrishnan, who did, came back with great stories of how things worked at Bell Labs.
Legends. Legends. I find it interesting that even Jansky had to put his work in the drawer and do, attend to, was it war work? I think it was, correct? I think it was doing government work during that time. During
the war, yes.
Yeah.
But that was quite a few years later.
Yeah, and so even these incredible legends didn't have the liberty to just decide exactly what they were going to do all the time. There were other priorities, right?
Well, I think in defense of the Bell Labs people, I would say that I think Jansky's discovery didn't really come to the fore and wasn't really appreciated until after the Second World War, when radio astronomy started to be really developed and took off. But between, let's say, 1932 and 1946 or something, very little happened.
Right. And then I think after he passed away at a very early age, his brother gave a talk, and that talk, it seemed to me even, and his brother had worked at Bell Labs before, or had known the people at Bell Labs. Somehow he facilitated the interview and hiring of Carl.
I didn't know.
Yeah. So, and when he gave this talk at a banquet, he sounded like he didn't even understand all of what his brother had achieved. And they were raised in a family filled with engineers. His father was the professor at Michigan and went and started the group that became NIST, I guess, started out in like 1902 to 1905, sometime around there, in the group that became NIST. And so he was really like one of the fundamental engineers of his day. And Carl himself was named after Carl Gustav, right? So of course he was named after a famous engineer. And if you have a name like that, maybe great things you expect great things of yourself. I don't know. But his brother, who was president the group that was IEEE at the time, you know, early days, he was the president of IEEE. He was in awe of his own brother, so I can imagine what it must, you know,
Right.
like. Yeah.
And I think he felt that his brother had not received the proper recognition.
What do you think?
I think in his life, he died too soon. If he'd lived a little longer, he would have understood what came of his discovery.
Yeah.
He'd lived another 10 years, but it's unfortunate that nothing much had happened by the time he died.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
So you had returned to this topic that Carl Jansky had been exploring, correct? And there were people at Crawford Hill who were already following up on that topic for a while, correct? At that point?
No, I don't think anyone else I think there was one thing in the late 30s that Carl did to make yet another measurement of radio astronomy. But other than that, I don't think anyone at Holmdel or later Crawford Hill had done any radio astronomy as such.
Interesting. Very interesting.
But they'd used the appropriate technology for doing satellite work, of course.
Yes. Yeah. And so when you came to Crawford Hill, they had already done Project Echo, and was Telstar already completed, or was that when you arrived?
Telstar was still active. And in fact, the Horn reflector had one of the reasons we started out at 4 gigahertz was that they had put a receiver for Telstar on the 20-foot Horn reflector. And that was a very good thing, that because that's a frequency at which the galaxy is not very bright. And so when we found the excess radiation, it was clearly excess.
Right. And you had a very precise instrument to do this measurement, right? So you could...
Right.
And
right.
So although you were investigating other topics, when you discovered the measurement that you made.
Well, what we were doing was looking to see potentially if there was a halo around our galaxy, which was making radio radiation. And to do that, Arno had built a very accurate co-load, which supplied a reference noise source. And I made the receiver which could accurately compare the two, the antenna to the reference noise source. And we did that because we understood that the antenna was reliable and should be able to, what came out of it ought to be what's in the sky, not something else, like most radio telescopes. Let's see, I've forgotten where we were headed.
So I think where we were headed was what you discovered instead of what you were looking for.
Oh, yes. Well, we discovered that the sky was brighter than we had any reason to expect. Extrapolating for lower frequencies or higher frequencies, we expected to see something near zero. We actually were going to, we're planning to make a measurement at a lower frequency where we expected to see something. But it looked like that would be impossible because at the high frequency we're expected to see nothing. We saw something that, although it sounds pretty small, was really overwhelming. That it was much, much too bright. We thought of everything we could think of that might cause it, and had ruled out almost everything that might be causing it. When Arno happened to talk to Bernie Burke one day, and neither of them later remembered what the original conversation was about, but at the end Bernie said, "What's going on with your crazy experiment?" And Arnos laid it on him that we had all this excess noise at our, if you will, our reference frequency we're expected to measure 0 that we couldn't understand. The background of this is that Arno and Bernie had been on an airplane going to some meeting in Canada, and Bernie had been asking what we were going to do. And when Arno said we were going to look for a halo around the galaxy, or at least measure the minimum brightness of the galaxy, Bernie said, "You're wasting your time. There's no halo around the galaxy." But fortunately, we didn't pay attention to that.
You mean like this picture behind me? The halo around the yeah.
So anyway, he had heard about a talk from someone at Princeton about the expectation that there would be such radiation left over from the Big Bang.
So there was a big competing theory there at the time, right? The steady state. Yeah.
Yeah, steady state theory and Big Bang were the two possibilities. The rough idea of steady state is as the universe expands, new matter is created, and later new stars and everything. And so the universe looks the same now and, 10 billion years from now. No. But anyway, and Sir Fred Hoyle was one of the leading exponents of that theory. Mm-hmm. And my one cosmology course during my PhD work had been from Fred Hoyle. So it seemed philosophically nice to have everything stay the same.
Well,
although it requires some new physics.
It also makes it logical to write a book that you think is going to be used for many, many years if everything stays the same, right? I mean, mm-hmm. Now we have to have new ways of updating information. How do you? That's when you think about like what kind of advice? What do you think? Like what's going to happen in the future? That's a big thing about future, right? Is as science evolves, as discoveries are brought in, mm-hmm. we really have changes in what we teach and the way we teach and the way people interact and do the things they do. Have you thought much about how you believe we can facilitate that process so that people can incorporate new information and help people stay up to date on these important discoveries?
Mm-hmm. No, I haven't thought so much about that. It's very difficult these days because there is so much going on. So many journals one might potentially read that there's not time to read.
Right. It's a never-ending problem, I guess, right?
Right. And the internet seems to just make even more information available, which is hard. I don't know what the answer is.
I'm glad because it gives us a chance to explore new things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So, one of the things we want to do is to maybe even help people look again across the 100 years of Bell Labs, right? Because this mm-hmm. coming year is the 100th anniversary. And it would be really nice to take a stab at like documenting astronomy, satellites, mm-hmm. and modern communication, just sort of like a slice through it and tell some of the stories, again, like from today's point of view, but looking back across what's happened over the years at Bell Labs. And I often think that one of the cool things about history and about conversations like this is that it's maybe we're asking the same questions, but we're asking it in this context today at this time, and how this time adds to that conversation. It's not the same answer that you may have had 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? Like mm-hmm. So these things do have new meaning with the people who you're in the room with, who's in the room at this time.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bell Labs often produced ideas that were impractical with the present technology. But in the future, like the original idea for cell phones.
Exactly.
No, in 1946, who could have made a thing in my pocket? Impossible.
Yeah. Right.
But exploring those ideas and being ready as the technology develops is a wonderful thing.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's always challenging, daunting to see which thing has to come first in order for it to happen. You know, many people have great ideas, patents, innovations, whatever, and they don't always get to be realized because of a budget or the other pieces that are missing, or someone having to do a market plan, or, you know, get funding or compete in some way for a limited resource. But once in a while, there's a real issue that changes everything. It makes people look to a solution they never would have looked to before. And these days, we look at technology quite a lot to solve problems, right? To solve problems that maybe never had been considered to be technology problems before, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if you were to think about like what you would like to see, how you would like to, I don't know, influence people to look to the future, I personally would like some of it not to be based on business model, but to be based on inquiry and interests and, you know, humanitarian maybe, or other inspiration. What do you think?
Yes, I think we ought to be thinking about what we need or what would help people, as opposed to what would make money.
Right. I think sometimes people wait. They end the conversation too soon, so they don't have a chance to explore who might need that thing or what it might be needed for, because there's some little part of the equation in the beginning that might be some kind of an equation having to do with who's the market, and then it's difficult to answer the question if the thing doesn't exist, right? Like,
right.
Even the phone that's in your pocket. How did they ever?
Well, yeah. Who would have thought all the things we would do with the phone that's in my pocket now?
Exactly. Yeah. And
it's not until you make it and let people start working with it, and I don't know, the guys at Apple have a good idea that it really turns into a marvelous thing that I'm sure the original cell phone people didn't understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember one of the adventures I went on with people at Bell Labs. We were trying to convince a company that we could put music on a wireless platform in the cloud and allow people to download one song at a time onto a device that would have memory on it. And they just were against it. No one is ever going to buy that. That's not our business model. How will we, license it and all that? And Apple did it, and the company we were talking to wasn't Apple. Was not. And to see that you can have all the answers and still people say no, they reject it. This must happen in a lot of people's lives, but I think at Bell Labs, we had a chance to see it at all different kinds of industries, all different kinds of scale and scope, and certainly universe scope is quite amazing, right? I mean, yeah. for the people who ran Bell Labs when you were there. Who was the president of Bell Labs when you were there? First one?
Oh, Bill Baker is the
first
one that
first.
the one that I guess I first remember. Yes.
And I think there was another one until 1970 or so. Who was that? Who was the one after that? The one who brought in Compner. We were talking about the traveling wave.
Oh,
yeah. Those.
I don't remember who brought Rudy in, but
yeah.
Rudy was a great guy.
Who was Rudy? Yes.
Rudy.
Yes. Tell me about Rudy.
I don't know that I knew him very well, but he was, I guess, I was an MTS. Art Crawford was my department head. Roy Tillotson was the director, but Rudy was sort of in charge of all of Crawford Hill. He was called an associate executive director, connected with John Pierce.
Right. I was Pierce. I was trying to think of. That's the name I was trying to think of before. John Pierce.
Right.
I know about his J.J. coupling.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things about John Pierce and J.J. Coupling, well, he wrote science fiction under the pseudonym J.J. Coupling.
Yeah.
And a couple of years before the Russians launched Sputnik, he wrote an article about the possibilities of radio repeaters in orbit, in other words, communication satellites. And I credit John Pierce with the Bell Labs being ready when satellites became possible. They were ready to do something with it.
I think it must have also been Pierce's somehow personality influence, that kind of creativity that allowed for the whole organization to be creative. Mm-hmm. And I could be mistaken, you know, reading from the pages is different from knowing the person. What do you think? But
he started a lot of different things at Bell Labs.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't finish many of them, but he started a lot of them. He would get other people. He
left suddenly? I remember he left suddenly. Did he leave suddenly because of, do you know why he left suddenly?
No, I don't.
No?
But he would go around planting ideas in the right place, and a lot happened because of him.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. I really
yes, that's what an executive ought to do.
Uh-huh.
And on this subject, one of the marvelous things about Bell Labs management was that they were scientists who had come up in Bell Labs.
Yeah.
And they knew that they should trust the people down at the working level to have new ideas. And rather than, well, John could plant ideas, but trust the people down there to work with them. Or if the people down there had ideas, take them seriously.
Yeah. I remember when I first came to Bell Labs, every person, the researcher, had a department number, and they had this expert database. So if you were looking for someone who knew the thing, whatever that thing was, presumably you'd know the person already, or you'd know where to find the person. But then if you didn't know any of that, there was this great structure in the department titles, department numbers, and then and you could find experts who would know that thing, right? Now it's like everybody has the same name, everybody has they're all replaceable. I remember one time when they laid off somebody who won the Nobel Prize that year, in chemistry, I think it was. I can't remember. I just thought somebody at Crawford Hill, I thought it was. They laid off one of these people and I don't know. But anyway, information became harder to understand because they tried to improve the way information was, the way the staff was managed by mapping to like best practices from other companies, right? And in
they had best practices.
They did, and they had an organic, you know, process that really worked. You know, yeah,
right. And unfortunately, well, it's probably more usefulness oriented these days, but I don't know. I'm not close enough to Bell Labs to say what's happening.
Right,
But,
right.
but the other thing is that they were funded from sort of a tax on the telephone bill. 1 or 2% tax on the telephone bill ran Bell Labs. And it was a steady source of funding. You didn't have to write proposals every year to keep your funding going. You could think about your work instead.
Yeah.
Much more productive than being a professor.
Even writing proposals is a crazy process. You get feedback from people and you wonder, who is this that's writing this thing? It doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the feedback I've seen on grant proposals is you really have to wonder who's writing these things, who's writing the feedback. But if you, let's see,
what I didn't point out about my dad was he was the first person in his family to go to college. And although he was a chemical engineer, the operation he was managing used a certain amount of electronics. And he somehow, and I wish I could go back and ask him the questions, how he learned the electronics he knew. But he was an inveterate do-it-yourselfer. He would fix lots of things around the house, and he included me in all of this. And I learned that there was almost anything around the house that broke that if I was careful, I could take apart, probably discover the problem and fix it and put it back together and it would work.
So when you take things apart and you see how it works, do you then suddenly or organically come up with ideas about how it could work better? Is that one of the processes by which you base your
Sometimes, yes. But and during the Second World War, electronic parts were scarce because they were all used in the war effort. And our radio, one of the output tubes blew out and he couldn't get a replacement. So he actually changed the circuit so that it could use a different pair of tubes that he could get. Anyway, this understanding of electronics he passed on to me. And starting making a crystal set as a very young kid. But he let me use a soldering iron, his test equipment, and later work on radios with lethal voltages inside. But and brought home magazines that I could read and learn about it. I remember one particular magazine that was aimed at radio technicians who fixed radios. And there was a repeating article of a fictional radio shop and problems that came in and how they solved the problem. I think I learned a lot about problem solving just by reading that stuff.
Not to mention by being with your dad while he spoke out loud, while he showed you what he was thinking and what he was doing. My dad was an electrical engineer. He went to Manhattan College. And he didn't get to work for very long in the field because his dad died and things happened and so forth. But his whole life, he taught me just the way you're talking about. That, you know, he was thinking out loud and he was doing, and I was meant to watch what he was doing and learn. You know what I mean? It was a wonderful experience being around someone who thinks that way. And yeah, I think that's part of this, you know, a lot of someone else who was a client when we were at Bell Labs, Nelson Riddle's son was one of our clients, and Nelson Riddle, are you familiar with Nelson Riddle? Do you know who he is?
I remember the name, but I'm not sure.
So he was a musician, and he really, like, he lived here in Remsen, and
Right.
yeah, so he was like really famous for working with the Clooneys, you know, Rosemary Clooney and Frank Sinatra, and you know, just like very successful groups. And his son was also incredibly talented, but he took a different path. But he learned everything, you know, in the home. He learned from this incredible person, and he had an education. So he had the DNA, he had a master class every day, and he had an education. The guy, like, you can't go wrong, right? So, and I think about that, like, as a kind of an icon of families, like your family, right? So you had this experience at home. Do you think your family did the same thing with your children? Do you think you had?
My daughter fixes a lot of things around the house. She's the honey and honeydew.
Yes, I love it.
My two sons didn't. Well, they do their own things, but they don't fix things around the house so much.
I used to think everyone was like my dad. I used to think, you know, it was normal when he didn't know something, he would make it a point to learn that thing, right? And he seemed to have an ability to learn things, which was really great. And so I never thought in my life that I wouldn't be able to learn something new, right? It was because I watched him, and I wonder if some of that is some other thing that you learned from him, because you know,
right?
So that he
that you can. Well, in a more microscopic sense, you take something apart and figure out how it works just by looking at it.
Yeah, and that's a different kind of, like a certain style of learning too, right? Which is probably deeply in us, in our DNA, in our vision system, in our brain, the way we learn. And I think when you think about the people that you work with, you probably learn from them watching what they do also, right?
Right.
So the person,
definitely.
Do you have memories of that from your work with colleagues or teachers or other people that you observed?
Well, I certainly learned a lot from my Bell Labs colleagues. I don't think I ever tried to compete with them, but you know, I could watch Charlie Burris put together a millimeter wave diode, see how it works and understand it. And that was certainly helpful in using it. And when we got off at Kit Peak or somewhere and there was a problem, that understanding was very useful.
So all the places that you visited in your pursuits of discovery and learning and building this rich legacy. Which are the places that you wanted to go to, aspired to go to, took a while to get to, or enjoyed the most, or still want to see? Is there like an adventure in this adventure?
Well, I think probably Crawford Hill was the place that I enjoyed the most.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of another place that I learned more, or you know.
I'm really glad and it's right here. It's really, I'm really glad that they preserved the place, that they're going to restore it, that they're going to make a park there, and that it's named for you. It's very comforting to know that, and exciting. Yeah,
the building is sort of deteriorated, And I don't see how Homedale could support that. But anyway, they don't have it. They don't have to worry about it.
Right. Yeah.
But
So for the future kinds of things that we talked about a couple of years ago, thinking about maybe a curriculum or a sharing, one of the ideas we've had with some of the local teachers is to feature local heroes like yourself, you know, and like make some curriculum that helps people understand the richness of Crawford Hill, the local Homedale, the people of Bell Labs, the people who are in those fields or related fields, and then make that like a fundamental part of the project, which would then be shared. Like it would be this is a thing we can share with you. You know, these are our local heroes, and this is something we can share with you. We have.
There could be something that could be played on the spot or loaned to schools.
Exactly. Right. And then do it like Homedale will have this resource. It will have this park. It has an amazing school district. And there are a lot of other school districts in the area that would benefit. People, you know, could come. I actually really like the whole notion of lifelong learning, where people get together and you've come out and met with students and listen to them tell their ideas. And I know so many people who've enjoyed those events. Is that something, I know you've been doing it for years. You've been going and giving classes at different universities and different schools. Is this something that you would encourage other people to do?
Yes.
Can you tell us why? What is it that you see in it? What's the value that you see in this?
Well, inspiring and sort of leading young people toward a productive life.
Do you think that people who participate, like me, I'm older now, right? When I go in and I meet with these students, or I hear them talking to you or to other people, I learn things even from the younger people. I learn how they think, what they value, I hear the questions that they ask. I hear the ideas that they have. Like, as you were saying, that your boss would come around and drop ideas into different departments, right? And say, maybe you could do this, maybe you could do that. I think sometimes I hear that from the young people too. What do you think?
I'm sorry, say again?
I think sometimes I hear bright new ideas, even from the young people. And I see the mentors get excited about that. I see the teachers get excited about that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. It's good that the teachers recognize new ideas and applaud them rather than just trying to poke facts in the students.
Right. So I hope that's something that we can, do ongoing, that we can learn, like pivot and evolve about how people learn, how people can teach, how people can share, and how it can be done across all the ages. Like, not learning isn't just for young people, right? So if you were working today, if you were still at Bell Labs today, right, as an employee at Bell Labs, and like some of us are facing a certain age, like, do we decide to go back to school? Do we learn from peers? Do you have suggestions?
Do what?
Do you have a suggestion about how those of us who are older would learn something new? Yeah.
I guess get interested in something. Start reading about it or finding people who know about it. Talk to them.
I think that's a
I
good
don't
idea.
know.
That's a very good idea. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us today that would be?
I don't think of anything right now. Certainly, in my present job, I enjoy also some of the other people up at the Center for Astrophysics and having students and postdocs around who are indeed a source of new ideas or new approaches to things. That maybe I'm a little ossified and it's good for them to push me in a new direction.
Mhm.
But I think I also can lead them somewhat toward productive things. So, well, I enjoy still doing it. When I was a first-year graduate student, I guess I had done what I wouldn't recommend. That is, I picked a good school without any idea of what thesis projects might be there. So I was looking around, but I was living in some rooms in the faculty club called the Athenaeum at Caltech. And there was a British astronomer from Cambridge there, and another Brit. And we got friendly and did things like over Thanksgiving, we went to the Grand Canyon and walked down and back up. But we did a number of things together. And David Dewhurst, hearing about all my interest in radio and electronics, told me about the new project at Caltech, building a radio interferometer, thing I ended up joining and doing my thesis with. So he introduced me to John Bolton, the professor.
Very cool.
And that was the beginning of my interest in astronomy.
Do you advise that anyone at any age could jump into astronomy? Do you think it's a subject that people can actually begin to do at some later time in their life?
You probably need some physics background, but yeah, astronomy I think is one of the more approachable subjects. It deals with things that lots of us understand, at least in a rough sort of way.
Thank you so much. Thank you.